Welcome to the Intuitive Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Rafferty, medical doctor, PhD, Reiki, and shaman intuitive healer. I'm here to bring you on a journey of holistic healing that explores the science of the physical body combined with mental and emotional well-being, energetic and spiritual health. I am so excited for you to be here with me today as we journey the depths of shame and what shame looks like. And I really wanted to discuss this topic today because, it's something that I journey with myself quite a lot. I've been on this journey with shame for a lot of my life, especially after coming out as a gay man and recognizing that I held shame in the body, but also because a lot of the clients that I see and a lot of the work that I do, a lot of my friends, people within my social circles, I've recognized that we all carry a lot of shame. And I really wanted to explore that today and what that looks like as a shadow within our energy, what it looks like as a shadow within our body, and also give you little steps or tips and tricks to help you work through that shame and come out the other side and step into pride. And I really love when people take a deep dive into this because it can be so transformative, because the power of shame can be debilitating. It can be very toxic within our energy field, and it can create a lot of energetic debris within our energy centers. And I tend to feel shame in the lower energy centers, in the root and kind of sacral chakra areas. When people carrying dense shame come into me, it's held as a heavy, heavy energy within those spaces. And that's all to do with obviously your familial connections and our social circumstances, our relational life, how it impacts our romantic and friend relationships. And carrying shame within us can be huge because oftentimes when we hold an energy of shame, we project that outwardly. And I often see within the gay community, within my gay clients, there's a lot of internalized homophobia that stems from their own sense of shame about who they are and their sexuality. And so I think it's really, really important to be able to work through this so that we're not holding that energy within the body or projecting it onto others in our relational lives. So just a little bit about what a shadow actually is. So generally speaking, and this is very much from the more shamanic element of what I tend to do. And, you can talk about these things within your psychotherapeutic outlets as well. But the shadow that we hold within the body are the parts of ourselves we like to keep in the shadows because we ourselves don't like those versions or those parts or those elements of ourselves. So what we do is we push them into the shadows. And when they're in the shadows, we don't like to look at them. That's why we put them there. But it's quite fascinating because when people come into our world and we get triggered by people and they really annoy us and we get upset by people, it's because they're actually touching on a little element of ourselves that we've popped into the shadows. And it's a lovely way that people give us a gift of being able to identify an element of ourselves that we've put into the shadows. Because the triggers that people bring to us are little guides to help us identify, well, why did that annoy me? What about that person annoyed me? Because it might be an element of me deep down that I've actually forced into the shadows that I don't like myself. But what I find intriguing on this journey is that a lot of the things we put into the shadows and a lot of the things that we hold in the darkness, that's our perception. That's our perception of whether we deem that to be good or bad. And some of the things that I've put into my shadows, when I actually drag them out of the shadows and into the light to really look at that, some of my friends, when I actually bring it to the surface to talk about, they're like, but that's one of your most beautiful qualities that we love about you. So our own perception of what our dark elements are, they can be perceived as beautiful light elements by others. And I think it's really important to recognize this, because the elements we don't love about ourselves, they might not necessarily be unlovable, which is really, really important. And I really love this concept. And on my journey into the energy of the full moon and the lunar eclipse, which we had last night, which, by the way, knocked me on my head. I was exhausted over the weekend, and the energy was so intense yesterday. And you'll see a lot of kind of pop astrology talking about the shadows that come with lunar eclipses and the transits that bring kind of retrograde periods if you're into astrology. And there's a lot of fear around a lot of that. But I saw this beautiful post yesterday that actually spoke into, no, the universe just wants us to evolve. All of these opportunities to work with the energy in the universe, in the solar system, work with the energy within ourself. It is all a chance to go within the shadows, but to evolve through the journey of the shadow work. And unfortunately, when we go into the shadows to look at the elements of ourselves we don't like, that's sticky. That's painful. That's hard, because we're being forced to really confront our demons. We're confronting the parts of ourselves we don't like. And actually, it's about bringing them into the light and just holding them in a beautiful space to say, you kept me safe at one time. So when we can actually bring light to the shadows, we can retrieve the power that that little part of our soul had that we basically forced away. So there's power. There's power and strength that we can retrieve when we go into these dark elements of ourself. Now, we can identify what these elements of ourself are by, like I was saying, looking at the triggers that other people bring about inside of us. Sometimes I'll be driving along the road and people are driving so slow, and that triggers the life out of me. And sometimes I get such crazy road rage, which I find hilarious, because I sit in such a calm, connected space with my clients, and then I can get on into the car and go and be like another person. And it's funny because there's a duality to that. Can I hold the calmness and also this need to move quickly? Can I hold both of those things? Why isn't this person moving fast enough for me? But also, outside of using the gifts that people are giving us through our triggers, we can sit with ourself with a page and a pen, and we can actually journal out the deepest and darkest secrets that we have in our soul and bring them to the surface and slowly coax those fears, those demons that we hold in the shadows, out into the light. Sitting with yourself in a very gentle way and just really doing some compassionate inquiry into those elements of yourself. And I did this over the weekend because I really wanted to work with the energy of the astrology, with the energy of the full moon. I wanted to work with the power that came with the lunar eclipse. So I sat down and I wanted to go deep into the energy of shame and what that looked like for me, deep into my root chakra. And I sat and I connected with my root chakra. I connected into that space. And I intuitively asked my body, I said to myself, what are the parts of you that you hope nobody finds out about? What are your deepest and darkest secrets that you would never tell anybody, that you would never want anybody to know? And when I sat with the paper and pen, I actually went into such a fear space when I asked myself that question. Because I thought to myself, what if I write these things down and someone finds this page? What if someone finds this page? Now, I knew that I was going to use this as part of a beautiful ceremony, a fire ceremony, to release that energy from my body. But I was still so fearful that the hour that would pass between me writing these down, doing my meditation and clearing and burning the page, someone might come into my apartment, which I live in by myself with my gorgeous cat, and find that page. And then everybody will know my deepest, darkest secrets. And I had to hold myself in such a gentle space of compassion to actually be like, do you know what, Tony, this is okay. It's okay to go there. And it's okay to bring these shadows to the light. Just bring them to the surface and begin writing. And when I began writing down all of these deepest, darkest fears that I hoped nobody would ever find out about me, a pattern emerged. I wrote down every single little one. And I actually leaned into the energy of what each story was trying to tell me. I went on a journey myself with my pen into each of the situations. And I didn't even just stop at writing down what the situation was and what had happened. I went deep into how I felt about it, why I carried so much shame around these things. And it was quite fascinating what emerged because every single thing I had written on that page, every single thing was to do with sex and sexuality. And that blew my mind because the darkest parts of myself that I carry so much shame around are to do with my sexual identity and my sexual practices or my sexual history. And that to me was so revealing and it gave me so much insight into the depths of the shame I carried around those things. And I really, really sat in such a gentle space. I felt so vulnerable after going to that space. I felt so vulnerable. I had to be so gentle with myself that day. And I did a lot of self care. And I really just held myself in such a beautiful, soft way after having the realization that I did. And it really made me reflect on my upbringing within Ireland, within a country that was so Catholic and rigid within its constructs of who was accepted and who was not accepted within the Catholic Church. And I feel like actually growing up in that environment, and especially my my grandparents, some of them were so religious. I remember being brought to mass when on my summer holidays. I'd be brought to church every day at 10:30. I used to be brought in by one of my grannies to the ordinations for the priests every year. And I would stand for 8 hours in the church on Gardner Street in Dublin, watching these ordinations. And my granny used to say to me all the time, "Oh my God, I'd love if you were a priest." And I remember thinking to myself, I could never be a priest. I'm not accepted by the Catholic Church. On a deep level, I already knew before I'd even come to terms with my sexuality that I was not accepted. The energy of non acceptance started so early for me as a byproduct of my involvement in the church because I knew that I was different. I knew my soul knew that I was different and that everything that was spoke about within the setting of the church was it did not resonate with me. I felt I was being vilified even as a child within that space. And I remember I went to a christening not so long ago where they talked about the child being born of sin, a child that was born into a loving relationship between a man and a woman who had been married for a very long time, trying desperately to have that child. But the child was still born into sin as a product of the sexual energy and exchange that had occurred. And it really made me think to myself, the suppression of sexuality, the suppression of sex as an energy, because sex and the sexual energy we hold in the body, it is so powerful. I can't even begin to describe the power that resides within sexual energy. There's a great power. And even some of the greatest healers I know, they're very in touch with that sexual energy. It's almost like it's channeled into their healing because it's so powerful. And oftentimes, I see a lot of gay men through my practice, a lot of people from the LGBTQ plus community in my practice who carry a deep sense of shame that stemmed from how they view their sexuality and how they were viewed within the setting of the church. And I see a lot of women who have greatly suppressed sexual energies. There is no power within their lower energy centers because that has been completely suppressed. And over the last couple of weeks, every single client that's coming through my door is talking about this. And it has been so wildly eye-opening for me on my journey. And, when we go even deeper into that, some of the gay men that come through my door, I say, do you love yourself? And they carry so much shame about who they are. Some of them can't even stand in front of a mirror and look at themselves naked or look at themselves in the eye because they carry such deep shame about who they are. Some of the women that come through my door, they carry such a sense of deep shame in their body about even having sex with their partners. What sex looked like before they met their husband or their same-sex partner. And the shame that is carried around that has lived on in the body. And it causes so many issues on a mental and an emotional, a physical and an energetic level. So it's really quite interesting because if you bring this back to this duality element, for women, perhaps when you went through puberty and you began to get a rise in the sexual energy, you were thinking, oh, but that's really wrong. In Ireland, we're told that sex is for babies. So why am I getting these strange stirrings or energies within my body? Like, the duality of what you've been told is wrong versus actually what feels innately true to the body. And similarly, on my path as a gay man of, being told growing up, men don't like other men, women don't like other women. But actually, in my body, what was true to my heart was, I do like other men. Why do I find that man quite attractive? When I'm told that actually that's wrong. That's the duality, the dual element of actually what's right in my body versus the shame that's being imposed upon me. And, many of us will carry the shame before we'll lean into what feels right in the body. And one of the most beautiful practices is to call back your energy and to reclaim the power that's been lost through this suppression of our sexual energy and our sexuality. And this was part of what I've seen within my own self over the last couple of days. I've learned so much about myself. And this is after journeying with a lot of this work with shame for many, many years. And even what internalized homophobia looked like for me. Because that was one of my shadows. I didn't love myself for being gay. So therefore, how did I view others within the gay community? And that has been a journey of evolution for me over many years. But clearly, I am still unfolding another facet of what this deep shame with regard to my sexuality looks like. Now, it's really quite interesting because I feel within my upbringing within the Catholic Church, it kind of, because I felt so deeply rejected, it forced me to disconnect from my spiritual element. It's almost like I perceived religion and spirituality to be one. But on my journey over multiple decades with this, I've realized that actually a representation or the infrastructure of the church, that doesn't need to represent spirituality to me. In fact, the more that I connect to the energies that lie beyond the veils of what we see here in our physical reality through my shamanic work, going on journeys to connect with energies beyond the veils of what we consider to be real. It's really quite interesting because you realize that a lot of the gods and all of these beautiful entities and energies that are celebrated in different religions, they are all just ascended masters of high vibrational consciousness that extend beyond the infrastructure of the church. And anybody can tap in to the beautiful energies from any of these energies, regardless of whether you follow a Buddhist path or a Catholic path or a Hindu path, because those beautiful ascended energies are accessible to everybody. And that is one gift that I have realized on my journey, is that actually through my yoga practice, through my mantra practice, I'll connect with the energy of Lord Shiva, a Hindu god, the great preserver, creator, and destroyer. I ask him to come and help me destroy the fear that resides within my body, to help destroy the shame, and to create beautiful things from that. And, sometimes for people who come through my door that are going on a journey of mother healing, I might see Mother Mary come in as an energy. So it's really beautiful to be able to tap into that. And even the beautiful enlightened energy of Master Buddha. Some people come through my door and have lived many past lives where they've connected deeply with a Buddhist tradition. And this is accessible and available to everybody. So I urge you that if you have disconnected from yourself or abandoned or rejected by an element of what the religious infrastructure has created, that doesn't mean you have to necessarily disconnect from the beauty and the magic of the universal energy of what a spiritual existence actually provides. And that is such a gift that I've received. And it was even really interesting because when I started on my Buddhist path, I remember they used to hold their hands together and pray. And I was so deeply triggered by my upbringing in the Catholic Church that I actually had, like I was saying, a shadow side of, I'm not doing that. I'm not putting my hands together. I'm not praying like that. I'm not praying to nobody. Because praying and worshipping to me equaled abandonment and rejection, actually. And this beautiful ordained member of the community came over to me and she was like, inquiring as to why I was having such a strong reaction to this. And when we had a discussion, she said to me, no, it's the jewel in the lotus. You hold your thumbs like this. And I loved that because the lotus, although it has the most magical, beautiful flower as it sits on the pond, that flower has risen from the mud at the bottom of the pond. It has risen from the mud and blossomed into this beautiful, gorgeous flower. And I just loved that. So even just that little understanding changed that for me. It was just shifting my perspective. But it was so important for me to bring that shadow element of what was triggering the life out of me within that session to the surface. So it's really quite interesting because if we go a little bit deeper into this beyond how we hold our hands, we can really actually start to identify, well, what other little parts of ourselves did we feel wounded by within this infrastructure? And I had the most insightful and fascinating conversation with my beautiful podcast producer, Becky, about kind of when you grew up within a certain rigid infrastructure, did you kind of associate all elements of how that looked with something that you wanted to rebel against? So we were even talking about, would you be okay with doing mantra work? Say I do a lot of mantra work with my Hindu practice versus would you pray? And, I'm very happy to do my Hindu mantras, but praying makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Or what about, uh, you know, hymns, religious hymns? Or would you be happy to play mantras in the house? So there's so many facets to this. And as I initially journeyed into this world of the divine, of what divine light looks like, even the use of the word God completely triggered me. But essentially, whether we talk about or label the light as God or the divine, essentially these are human words to describe spiritual concepts. And this is where we can really get bogged down within our human existence, is actually, I don't like that thing because that's related to trauma. That's related to rejection, from abandonment, from how I grew up and from my childhood. But it's okay because I like this facet of it because it's called something different, actually. And I wasn't exposed to that when I was younger, so that's not associated with my rejection wounds. So, I think journeying with this can be really, really insightful for ourselves. Are you triggered by elements of this, but you're quite happy to accept other elements from other traditions? And I think ultimately it's about working with where you're at currently. Where are you at currently? Don't beat yourself up because actually you're still repulsed or repelled by something. That's absolutely fine. you know, but it's lovely to be able to identify that and actually sit with yourself in a really loving space about actually is that coming up for me because that's a little wound that I have there that needs to be tended to. Just hold it in some softness. Because as I've journeyed through this, the stuff that really triggered me at the very beginning when I walked through the doors of the Buddhist Center 10 years ago, that is stuff now I hold in such deep respect and regard because it's such a beautiful element of how I hold myself, how I hold others, and how I hold respect for other people's views. And old Tony, from a very wounded space, wouldn't have recognized that at the time. So just be really gentle with yourself with that. But I think it's lovely to touch on elements of wounding from our upbringing and how it impacts our belief structure and how we show up essentially in this physical world. And funnily enough, I actually sat down with my friend after I had gone on this journey into the depths of my own shame at the weekend. And I said to her, I said, can I actually talk to you about some of this stuff? I was like, I have carried this my whole life. I was like, I've carried some of this stuff for decades. Can I express it to you? And I feel very vulnerable in this. So please hold me with the most gentle, gentle love that you can. And when I expressed some of the things, she turned around, she was like, oh my God, that happened to me too. I did that too. And I instantly gained such a sense of relief. I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one. And some of the stuff that I actually carried around with me when I got to express that were things that other people said to me that reinforced a shadow I already had. I will never forget this one man that I went on a date with. And he projected such vitriol and internalized homophobia onto me that it actually deeply, deeply wounded my heart, deeply wounded my sacral and my root chakras. Like, still, this is only stuff that I'm shedding in recent weeks and months. Through one interaction, the hate and the vitriol that he had for himself that became projected onto me, I then carried because it actually validated some of the shadow I had in my own body. So, some of that wasn't even mine. The shame I carried in my body wasn't even mine, but it validated my shame. And just in line with what I was talking about with regard to internalized homophobia, I tend to see actually in women there's internalized misogyny. And some of the wounds that they carry and the shame that they carry about what clothes they wear, how they view sex and sexuality, these are all handed down through generational impressions of how our mothers or grandmothers needed to show up. And some of the most wounding things that can be said to women are by other women and the wounds that they hold within the body and the internalized daggers that are turned inwards when these aspects of themselves are being triggered, are being brought to the surface, or they're being validated by further cruel things that are said within social media, within the general public, within the news infrastructures. All of these things validate those wounds we carry internally, and it can be so, so damaging for us. So if we can actually work through our sense of shame and shed those shadows within our body, the things that people say to us, that's not going to validate that anymore because we don't hold it anymore. It can wash off our back like water on a duck's back. So that's why it's so important to do this work so that you're not susceptible to other people's shadows anymore. And I just wanted to touch on as well this beautiful concept that was in North American native tribes for many, many, many years. And it's the concept of two spirit. And, traditionally speaking, someone that had two spirit embodied the genders of both men and women, the masculine and feminine genders. And they embodied both of those. And they were actually revered within the community, within the indigenous communities. They often tended to be healers, seers, they tended to be the shamans of the communities because they could see everybody's perspective. They could see the perspective of the men and the women, and they could hold them and help them to heal on their journey. And it was fascinating the more I read into this actually, because this concept of duality, which I touched on initially at the beginning of the podcast, can you hold the energy of one thing while you're also holding the energy of another? Can you hold anger and happiness? Can you hold joy and fear? Can you hold all of those things at once? And I loved this concept of the two spirit. And it just kind of, as I was reading about it, I read more into actually it's the Western world that's actually vilified these gorgeous healers, these gorgeous souls that carry these energies of duality that can help others on their journey. We've essentially vilified and kind of forced some of this into the shadows through societal conditioning as well. So I think being able to hold the energy of duality is quite beautiful. And, it's often something I see quite regularly in practice is how do you hold the energy of the fiery outbursts when you're very fearful about expressing your vulnerability? How do you hold both of those energies? Can you bring them closer together so you can speak your vulnerability, but also not get to the point where you need to actually get to the fire point? Journeying with duality is something that I do on a day to day. And even within the energy of the full moon yesterday, I was really journeying with what it felt like to be a doctor and a shamanic healer, someone that's very grounded in the logical, rational thinking of the physical body, but also has one foot in the spirit realm so that I can see beyond the veils of reality to help people through psychic intuition, through clairvoyance, through mediumship, help people to connect with their ancestors and loved ones. That energy informs my medicine. And I was like, how do I bring these things together? How do I bring these things together? And it was only through in preparation for this podcast I realized you don't need to. You can be both of those things. You can be both of those things, and that's okay. I can be a doctor and I can be a shaman, and I can use one to inform the other. That's what makes me unique and makes me powerful. I would love for you guys to be able to sit and actually think about what makes you unique, what makes you powerful. What dual energies do you hold in the body that you can actually love each of? So, just to recap, I just wanted to bring you on a little journey with regard to what shame looks like and a way that we can actually look into what we hold as shame, the shame shadow within the body, is begin journaling or reflecting on what triggers bring to the table. What are we triggered by? That gives us a good insight into kind of what we hold in the body that we don't necessarily like about ourselves. But one of the most powerful practices that I find with regard to working through shame is to sit and journal about the things that you really don't want other people to know about you, the deepest fears in your body that you don't want anybody to know about. What are you most fearful about people finding out about you? And they are the fruits, they are the seeds which will basically help you to grow into a beautiful, strong, and powerful person when you can really fully sit and face those fears and transmute that energy. And when you've done that journaling, what I tend to do after practices like that is do a huge big breathwork session, setting the intention to release the energy. You can go and see an energy healer or a shaman like me after you've done that work, bringing the paper with you, setting the intention to clear that energy. You can do your yoga practice. You can do energy healing on yourself if you wanted to. And after you've done that work, I would recommend doing a fire ceremony where you set that paper alight. You burn away all of those fears. You burn away that shame, transmute that energy. And the fire ceremony is something that's so powerful that's used by shamans around the world to transmute energy. So I hope that you found this useful today. Obviously, going into these spaces can be hugely vulnerable for me. And it brings fear sometimes when I actually decide to do these episodes. But that is a sign to me that actually this is something that's very important. If this is something I'm working on, if it's something I'm seeing within the collective of who's coming through the door, then this is something that can benefit at least one person and help them change their relationship to their own sense of self, help them work through the shame. And like I say, I do one-to-one sessions and I can hold you in what you need to be held in. I can help you transmute that energy. And I am here as a loving and kind ear if you need anything on your journey of self-discovery and evolution. And I hope from my heart to yours that the next couple of days, as you journey through the other side of the lunar eclipse, it brings a lot of clarity and insight for where you need to go on the next steps of your healing journey. Much love, Dr. Anthony.